We have hit college teams in the Big 12, college football schedules. Yesterday was Cincinnati. We're going alphabetical order. And now we hit Dion, Colorado, year 3. Interesting opening game for them. Of course, last year they had that early game, I think it was week 2 against Nebraska and Lincoln. Then they had a nice little run. Didn't end well against BYU. But let's start with Colorado and the first chunk of their schedule. In fact, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They have 7 straight games to start the year. Is that right? Before their first bye? In late October, if I read that correctly. And they open up against Georgia Tech.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough one. Georgia Tech returns pretty much everybody. They lost a couple transfers. They've done a good job of retaining. And Blake Gideon, the new defensive coordinator over there or safeties coach, Blake Gideon went to Georgia Tech anyway. But, yeah, that 7 in a row is tough, although outside of Georgia Tech, Houston's a wild card. The last 3 are the big ones when you go BYU, TCU, Iowa State back-to-back before you get the bye.
Yeah, Georgia Tech's a quality non-con. That's a nice way to open up the season. Delaware, obviously, you feel great about. And then, as you mentioned, there's that long stretch. Houston on the road, Wyoming. Weird how Houston's a week ahead of your final non-con game. But regardless, you'll travel and open up Big 12 play there. And then, no, I guess, yeah, that's right. That worked out that way. So, yeah, I don't know what happened with the scheduling there, but, it's a nice chunk of games that's going to have you out there week after week after week for that first part of the season, just grinding away. Georgia Tech, you like that, although maybe don't like the result necessarily. Depends on just how good Colorado is, but I think Georgia Tech's a team that you expect to be pretty good, I think, heading into the next season, especially if Haynes King can finally be healthy for what seems like the first time in forever. But, just having them in there definitely makes that a good little non-con. And then, BYU obviously will be a tough game. The rematch from the bowl game at TCU should be a tough game. Iowa State on paper is a tough game. And then at Utah – and then, so Iowa State would be the end of that. That's a really tough stretch.
The Georgia Tech game of interest because, as somebody was at Greg in the chat room, they split a national championship some 30-something years ago. When you had that stretch where Washington won a national title, split it with somebody, but Georgia Tech and Colorado had a split national championship.
Bobby Ross was the coach.
Bobby Rice, yeah.
Bobby Ross had a look about him. He was the coach of the Lions and Chargers after that, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Lions and Chargers. He had a look like he'd always just spit out a lemon. Like his face just looked like he took a bite of a lemon and realized it was sour and then let it fall out of his mouth.
Yeah, they've never met, by the way. Georgia Tech and Colorado. 1990 was the year that they split a national title with Bill McCartney, who just passed away. So there's the Colorado schedule to open up against Georgia Tech, Delaware, the Hens, Houston as a conference game prior to when you play that final non-conference game against Wyoming. To me, you have that Game 5, that interesting matchup, the repeat of the bowl game where BYU beat them up pretty good in San Antonio when it comes to the end of the month of September.
Yeah, they've got, and we'll get to their other stretches, but that last 3 games before the first bye on the 18th, that's pretty brutal. And this team has a lot of questions. I mean, they're not returning a bunch of dudes. This is a lot of new. Now, Dion proved last year he can do well with a lot of new, but a lot of the stuff that he had was back after a year, especially the quarterback and the Heisman Trophy winner and the wide receivers. That's all going to be new this year for them. So they really have to make hay while the sun shines in those first 4. They really do, because the 4 after that, because the first one after the bye, I think Utah's going to be a much improved team. The 4 after that are going to be really, really tough.
Yeah, I think Georgia Tech's probably a loss on paper. And then after that, I think you feel good about the next 3, although we don't know really with Houston on the road how good the Cougs will be. And Connor Wegman is more of a proven thing than what Houston rolled out there last year. I think in terms of just natural kind of upside, where Donovan Smith was talented, but he also had a lot of things that drug him down. Turnovers being the biggest thing that really just kind of ruined your perception of him sometimes, and how good of a player he could be, because there were so many mistakes. But I think with Connor Wegman pulling the trigger, Houston's definitely a team that you look at maybe a little bit differently, because you anticipate the quarterback play being better. However, they've lost coordinators, so I don't know. I think you on paper, you're definitely, if you're a Colorado fan, you're saying that's a win. But we'll see. So, 3-1, 4-0 should be the start as far as that first four stretch now. Then when it gets into Game 5 and Game 6 and Game 7 during that stretch, you're looking like you could go from being 3-1 to 3-4 pretty quickly if you're not careful, because
that's far.
So much forgiveness. Wait, did you say forgiveness like far, or forgiveness like forgiveness? Forgiveness. Forgiveness. Forgiveness.
I'm hearing far.
Forgiveness. Like forgiveness. Forgiveness? Forgiveness.
I'm still hearing far, but whatever.
Introducing Stealth 2 with more carbon for more forgiveness.
Forgiveness. Just hit it.
So, I don't think you're being chosen over BYU at this moment. I don't think people are taking you at TCU at this moment. I don't think you're picked over Iowa State at this moment. And this is on paper, but I think you're an underdog in 4 of your first 7 games. So I think that's where that will be very interesting to see where they are on the other side of that first wave of games.
I wonder how it worked out this way. Now, this is not the first time anyone's had to go like the first 7 games or so without any kind of bye. There's probably, I think, been years when you didn't have a bye forever. But you get the 2 byes when you're a part of the Big 12, and they get them, but they will get them on the 18th of October and then the 15th of November. Maybe if you can somehow get to that point and everything's pretty good, man, you get a nice little pick-me-up to rest for the stretch drive. But this is kind of a strange schedule, the way this thing's put together.
Yeah, I mean, if I were a Colorado fan and looking at some of the other ones we've looked at, and look, there's probably a couple other teams that have this, I would think it kind of sucks. I mean, it's great, like as far as the teams that you play, Georgia Tech, BYU, TCU, Iowa State, Utah, West Virginia, Arizona State, Kansas State. That's a fun-ass schedule right there. I mean, as far as games you want to watch, but as far as the way it's set up, I'd be kind of pissed.
7 games at home, though. That's obviously what most of the Power 4 schools are always going to want to have, that unless there's a neutral site game. Like we heard with Jamie Pollard, Iowa State, Kansas State gave up a home game to play them in Dublin, Ireland. That's a really, you got some nice names in that mix. But what a nice start with Haynes King, Georgia Tech, and that game as the opener to start off their 2025 season.
So now after the bye week.
After the bye week, then you get Utah, and then you have Arizona and West Virginia as a threesome.
Arizona, we've talked about at length because they're, the school we started with. But we don't really know what's going to happen there. They've got a coach that's probably going to be coaching for his job, especially at this point in the season. West Virginia, again, a wild card. November 8th, how much does Rich Rod year 1 click, with what they have? I would still think that that one's a bit of a toss-up. So the at Utah, though, after the bye and after that brutal run, a key game to me on how Colorado will probably finish the season if Utah is as good as I think personally that they're going to be.
Yeah, that second stint, obviously Utah and Salt Lake City to start that off is going to be a tough game. I think we all anticipate Utah being better, and playing there is not an easy task per se, although that ought to be geographically a better game, and it's a pack foe going back to where you just were. So I think there will be plenty of just built in kind of between those fan bases to make that an exciting trip for both sides, especially if they both end up being pretty good or have something to play for at that point. And Arizona, I mean, who knows? West Virginia in Morgantown, who knows? But I think if Rich Rod gets them fired up early enough in the season and brings back some of that magic, then playing in Morgantown might be hell again. But it hadn't been hell for a little while. It's it's not as nearly as ferocious as it seemed to be in years past here lately. But you can get it back that way quickly by just having the right mix of, team, coach, fan base. And I think that there's that excitement you feel right now that you haven't felt there for a little while. So, if they win, that could be one of those where it's hell to play in Morgantown again. But we'll see sort of where both are at that point. And so, having 2 road trips in that 3-game stretch there in that second wave of games is I think it all just kind of depends how we view that, depending on how they are in that first wave. Are they 3-4? Or are they, they need to win 5 in a row to go to a bowl game? I mean, what are they looking at having to do? How difficult does that second half look will depend on how that first half goes. But, that's at least one, if not a couple, losses that I drop in that 3-game stretch right there as well.
I love the colors of gold and black. I've always enjoyed those colors. One of the notes about West Virginia last year, first of all, they weren't very good. They were, at times, it looked like they would tease you a little bit. And then, of course, they lost in the bowl game to Memphis, but Neil Brown gone. They were 3-4 at home. You can't do that. No matter who you are, whether it's in Salt Lake City or in Morgantown or Waco or in Lubbock, you can't go 3-4 at home, and sometimes you're just not very good. And it all started with that loss, getting beat up by what turned out to be a hell of a team in Penn State. We knew they would be good, but losing by 22 at home. The one that hurt them, though, they lost back-to-back games at home against Iowa State, K-State, and both of them were double-digit losses, and that sent them, of course, into a pretty big funk, although they rebounded with a couple of road games after that. So then you close it out. Defending Big 12 champion Arizona State and Kansas State, Chris Kleiman and company, and you might be playing – based on what we think at times, and of course the Big 12 doesn't always work that way, you might be playing teams in your last 2 weeks that might be playing each other for the Big 12 championship.
Yeah, and you're also playing Sam Levitt and Avery Johnson, should they be healthy. That's a tough matchup. Now, look, Caden Salter's got a bunch of wins under his belt in his career, but that's at Liberty.
He's going to play the toughest schedule by far that he's ever played. It's not even – you can add up every game he played in at Liberty, put the best games together on a schedule, and this is still a tougher schedule than that. I'd be willing to bet that. Yeah. I mean, they played Oregon in a bowl game, but beyond that,
they didn't pick that though.
No, they didn't schedule that. They wouldn't have scheduled that. But beyond that, I don't know their schedule off the last couple of years off the top of my head. I feel pretty confident saying put the best of that together, and this is still a better schedule than that.
Yeah.
So as far as who he's playing defensively week in and week out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted for the Caden Salter fans out there, I understand he's won a lot of games, but this is really tough. And I think that 2 of the toughest you could possibly get. And again, the Big 12 gets topsy-turvy, but as far as returning guys filling in who lost, look, Arizona State loses a true superstar in Cam Scadaboo. You're not just going to replace Cam Scadaboo. He's special. He's one of the most unique and interesting college football players you're going to see. Kansas State loses DJ Giddens, so that's going to be big. But they already, kind of have the Dylan Edwards back there. They've got things going for them, and Avery Johnson back for another year as a starter. That's 2 really tough games to end out the season. And the way it looks to me, unless there's a lot of things that are different, that's going to be maybe the difference between 5-7 to 7-5 or 6-6. The way that this schedule works out for them.
All right, so there we are. Anything else to add to them?
Yeah, I want to talk about those last 2 games there, Arizona State and Kansas State. Like you said, that's 2 teams that could be playing for the Big 12 championship, and 2 teams that I think on paper expect to be very good. So, closing out the year in Manhattan. You could very well not have a bowl game even possible at that point. Maybe you're playing for win number 6. I think that Georgia Tech game will kind of set the tone because I don't think there's many gimmies on this schedule. I mean, I know there's probably some Colorado faithful that feel like it's just going to keep ripping and roaring and ascending, but I just don't know how you lose 2 top 5 to top 10 NFL draft picks, a Heisman Trophy winner, and your starting quarterback who knows your head coach by blood, and how you're just going to bring in guys and it's just not going to – and not to mention the wide receiving core and whatever else you want to throw in the mix. There's a lot that will be different. They will not be nearly as recognizable. They'll be recognizable as head coach, but beyond that, it's going to be a lot of new with no Shador and no Travis Hunter. And Again, the entire wide receiving core basically is what it feels like. So, I don't quite know what to expect from Colorado except for a little bit of a downward trajectory. That doesn't mean you don't make the postseason, though, but I think that's highly dependent upon that start and that Georgia Tech game, and then that first part of the Big 12 schedule, that BYU, TCU, Iowa State. I mean, they didn't catch many breaks. They don't play Baylor. They don't play Texas Tech. I'm trying to think of who else they miss out on. I mean, they don't play Kansas. So those are maybe some teams that you wouldn't necessarily be favored against either. So maybe it's good to miss those, but, I mean, you're facing plenty that I don't think you're going to be favored against. So, I think that you shoot for a bowl game. I know fans will shoot for Big 12 titles and all that. I don't think that's realistically in the conversation at the moment, but I also know it's the Big 12, so we weren't talking about Arizona State in any way, shape, or form this time a year ago. So maybe Colorado's a huge surprise, but, on paper I think you're hoping and believing that you'll make a bowl game. I don't know that you're really going too much further than that, though, based on what we see on paper.
Will Shepard, Jimmy Horn Jr., LeJontay Wester, they lose one of their offensive linemen and Mayers. You mentioned Shador. I mean, a ton on defense, which really, to me, they always had that explosion offensively, but the defense has got after your ass in some of those games at the end of the year. Green, Cokes, Bentley, Travis Hunter, obviously, Craig Silman, Shiloh. At times, he was erratic, but they're losing a ton of talent, and they're trying to refill the cupboard too. It will be interesting, as you mentioned, with Salter playing at Liberty. Looks the part at times, but you're right. He has not played anybody like this on a week-in and week-out basis. He's about to do that. And I don't know, freshmen that come in, is Julian Lewis going to be like dynamic right off the top? I don't know. But if, in fact, he's the one that it ends up playing quarterback rather than Salter. Marion Miller's a guy to think about. We're not breaking down all that analysis, but they do have some guys coming back that can. Draylen Miller and Miller, a couple of Miller kids at receiver.